Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Liberty Me Live. We are here for the very first evening of Scotch and Scholars. I'm Mike Reed, your host, and our guest tonight is Professor Gary Galles. Gary, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you again. Cheers.
Cheers, indeed. I am drinking a fresh new bottle of Red Label Scotch whiskey, as is appropriate to the show title.
I'm afraid mine isn't Scotch, but it's what I have.
Is it really the bourbon?
No, it's not. It's Southern Comfort, because that was something that a friend of mine who I was close to in college, and we were both econ majors, that got us into it. Was Southern Comfort was the drink that we bonded over. So I thought it was appropriate.
Like when you were getting ready for exams and so on, it was Southern Comfort time?
Actually, yeah. In the evening, we would do that stuff. We had the experience where there was one famous question from George Stigler that we were studying because we were in the graduate, as undergraduates. We couldn't figure it out. A couple drinks later, in the morning at breakfast, I did it on a napkin. I could figure it out. So yes, it did help.
So for those of you who don't know, Gary is a professor at Pepperdine University. He is also the author of Lines of Liberty, a new ebook from Liberty Me, and also the book that will be starring in today's show, Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies, another Liberty Me book. This is a collection not just of the policies that are emanating from all corridors of power in the United States today and what's wrong with them, but also the ideas underlying those policies. So most of the book is really sort of an ideas book, ideas applied to policies. And as he says on the back, when there are false premises, it's very hard to get correct policies in the end.
Well, it may be impossible or almost impossible.
Yeah, we don't seem to have a great track record lately of good policies anyway.
Well, you know the old saying about a broken clock being right twice a day. So if somebody actually asked me to comment on Donald Trump maybe a week ago,
yeah.
Something I said, well, you know, he's right once in a while, because when his self-interest lines up with the general welfare, then he's right. The rest of the time, there's no relationship between those two.
No, indeed. So tonight, the policy we really want to narrow in on is the idea of a minimum wage. I've been enjoying greatly. I don't know if everybody else has seen it, but there's lots of posts going on. You see them on Facebook or on Liberty Me about robots for a $15 minimum wage. And so I'm not yet replaced by a robot, but if they keep raising the minimum wage, someday I may be. Maybe even Gary too.
Yes, I'm not sure they make robots that think as oddly as I do. That would be extra, but you know, they are doing it. One of the fast food chains announced that they were going to replace people with, you know, little computer screens at the table, so you will replace waiters. And earlier times, for instance, the history of those restaurants where you go down the long lines of tables and serve yourself, those were caused by an increase in the minimum wage. Because when you serve yourself, you don't need all the servers, you don't have all the waiters, and when you raise the price of waiters, you have more banquet-style foods. They help to eliminate full serve at the gas stations in America, because the cost of hiring minimally skilled kids went up relative to doing it yourself. So, I mean, there are all sorts of historical episodes. This has happened before. It's not like it's a surprise.
Right. So what does this do in terms of the informal sector? Like, I remember when I was a kid, how I got money, I just mowed people's lawns. And I don't think there was ever any tax collection relevant to that. I don't think any government official knew that I was mowing people's lawns. And my advertising was just, I was riding around town on my bicycle pulling a lawnmower behind me.
Yeah.
And but nowadays I feel like I can't, the wages to hire children to mow my lawn have gone up. I don't understand. I would think that they'd be being driven out of the formal economy by rising minimum wages, and they'd be flocking to the informal economy to mow my lawn for me.
Well, they see that effect both in the informal economy, and you see an effect like that with it's like with union wages. Union wages have a predictable effect on the non-union sector. So if you raise the minimum wage, there are fewer jobs available in the, you know, legitimate sector. Some of those people will simply shift over into the other sector, and it tends to lower their wages because they can't get jobs elsewhere. But if fine, upstanding, and law-abiding citizens such as yourself insist on being above board, then for you, the law may be binding. But if you're in America, you have to make them wear a helmet while they ride around. So you
I have to,
yeah, mowing the lawn too.
Helmet, eye protection. I want to just take.
Go
ahead.
There was a story several years ago in the middle of the recession where this trucking company could not hire any truckers if he paid them above board. He could hire thousands of drivers if he paid them under the table in cash, but he couldn't hire anybody at the wages he would pay otherwise, because they could work under the table, not pay Social Security, still be eligible for welfare, still be eligible for food stamps. So this scam economy.
Yeah, and it seems, and along with that, if you're paying people above board, then you have to deduct payroll taxes on your side and on their side.
Well, there's a nanny tax regulation in the United States where if you pay somebody more than a certain amount, and it's far less than I pay my gardener, you're supposed to set aside, Social Security for them and do all that too. So one of the things people don't realize, the minimum wage is not the minimum wage. In America, you have to pay the minimum wage, plus you have to pay 7.65% of that, because the employer has to pay half of their Social Security and Medicare taxes. Plus, the employer has to pay unemployment insurance. And what's a really big one, an employer may have to pay workman's comp payments that may be $4.50 an hour. In some places where you're likely to be injured or fake injuries, then you have to pay that. So if they're going to raise the minimum wage and they're going to raise all those other parts of compensation, I think the minimum wage is going to be over $20 an hour.
Wow. You mean even at present? I mean, the federal minimum wage is, what is it, $7.25 right now?
Well, workman's comp depends on the state.
I see.
State by state. So yes, there are some states that, including workman's comp for dangerous occupations, the minimum wage could well be over $20 an hour in some places already.
Wow. I wonder if fast food counts, like the danger of putting your hand in the deep fryer.
I think in the fast food thing, I think it's more likely that someone's going to be in a dead-end job and is going to find a way to create an injury in the underground economy. So the idea is that, and that's why you don't see more data on it. Well, the workers' comp part varies by state and industry. So you can't nail down some national number and it says it costs this much, because it depends on what the industry is and it depends on a bunch of other things. Plus, what if you have to train people? The employer bears the burden of training you. In fact, that's one of the things I wanted to make sure I commented on about the minimum wage. If you're in my class at Pepperdine or in your class, right, the government heavily subsidizes you. They subsidize the education, they subsidize loans. So if you're in a formal academic setting, they make it very easy to get an additional education.
Right.
How does somebody with no savings who's not going to go to college get an education? They have to pay their employer for the cost of training them. Well, if you have no savings, what's the only means you can pay them? You accept a lower wage than you would have gotten in effect. So you accept a lower wage to compensate the employer for the cost of training you for future income. If you say, just to pick an example, say that you already value at $12 an hour. If the minimum wage was $8, you could accept $4 less than you're worth each hour, 8 instead of 12. And for that you could pay me to train you so you could earn more in the future. So you're paying me on
it doesn't look like I'm paying you. It looks like you're only paying me $8 an hour. Yes. I mean,
but really what's going on is you are paying me to train you so you have skills to earn more in the future. Right? Now, raise the minimum wage to 12, and what happens to the ability to pay for that training? I have to pay.
I can't pay you.
That's right. So what happens is they try to subsidize the bejeebers out of formal training in institutions, right? And they make it almost impossible for young people who have no savings, who want to learn on the job, to do the same thing. I think it's because universities are better lobbyists than low-skilled workers.
Well, universities are better lobbyists than McDonald's, evidently. Although maybe it's just that the robots are great lobbyists and they're going to win out in the end altogether.
Well, they don't have to sleep.
They don't have to sleep. I mean, okay. So in terms of automation, wouldn't we expect there to be a process of automation as technology advances for routine low-skilled jobs, not necessarily fast food, but already, I remember you go to the supermarket, you want to buy stuff, you could go see like a human cashier, or there's the robot cashier that just like you put your groceries in front of the
that's already in the process in my town. The store I shop at is trying to get people to do self-checkout. So they have, you know, a certain number of regular checkout lines, and they have these others with one worker there to supervise 4. I usually get enough stuff, and there's something like, what if it doesn't scan right? I still go through the regular ones, but it's clear they're trying to replace checkers with others. Well, one of the reasons is that the union contract raised the wages. So you're going to have automation where it makes sense, but the rate at which you substitute that automation is a function of the cost of the alternatives. So if the alternative unskilled workers goes up, yes, you're going to get more automation. But automation is one thing that you'll shift into. You'll also shift into higher skilled workers. In fact, that's why the unions are the main backers of higher minimum wages. You think, why would they back it? They say, well, it's because we care about the good of, you know, workers. Well, if that was true, they wouldn't spend so much time keeping others out and so forth. But what they're really doing is they're raising the price of substitutes. So say you're a union worker and you get paid $40 an hour. I'm a low skill worker and I get paid $8. What that means is every 1 hour of yours they hire, they give up 5 hours of me working. If you raise my wage to 10 by raising the minimum wage, now they only give up 4 hours of me working for you. So unions are raising the price of low skill workers that substitute for unions, which increases the demand for union workers, which raises their income. And it's important to note it raises union members' income whether or not it raises low-skilled workers' incomes. That simply does not change anything about their incentives. Who else likes higher minimum wages? Well, what if you're in the Northeast? Nobody gets paid the national minimum wage. So if you raise the national minimum wage, it doesn't affect New York City, but it does affect Selma, Alabama. So it raises the price of production in low-wage areas relative to New York.
So it helps New Yorkers.
Yes, it helps New Yorkers. Why do you think that liberal coalition in the Rust Belt is so liberal? They're high cost. I can raise the price in all those other states relative to what it costs here, which raises their cost of production relative to mine, and it's going to shift business to us. So they win, so they can pretend to be generous, whatever, but what they're really doing is raising their own incomes. Why do politicians in the Northeast like this? Well, if I'm making more money all around here, they like me, I'm for it. Of course, I dress it up as not raising my people's income, I'm being, compassionate. That's one of the reasons the Democratic Party lost the South. Low-skill minority workers were part of the Democratic coalition. What happens at every time union interests conflict with the minorities and the Democrats pick the unions? Eventually the South wises up and saying, wait, we're getting screwed here, right? They are benefiting them, but it's harming us. Well, why is the South almost solidly Republican? Because the Democrats kept selling out minorities in this particular area.
Okay, but the popular rhetoric I see is seems like a very solid line on, you see it on MSNBC or Salon.com or Huffington Post, this sense that raising the minimum wage does help.
There for a second. Those don't count.
So it seems like a lot of people actually believe that raising the minimum wage will in some way help low-skilled workers.
That has been repeated for 80 years? Since the first, federal minimum wage, it's repeated over and over. People don't think carefully, and they want to think that what's good for them is good for others. So if you were a union member, you don't want to think of yourself as a selfish bastard ripping off low-skilled workers to benefit you, but that's what you're doing. So what do? We convince ourselves of a story by which what's good for me is good for you too. It's just not. Yeah, that's a detail.
Okay, so I want to take a moment to look at part of the book here. So once again, folks, this is Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies. This is a wonderful paperback edition. You can get it on Amazon.com. It also, because you, my audience, you guys are Liberty Me members, if you go on down to our liberty.me library and you check out Gary Gallows' book, Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies, I'll put the link in a moment, you can get the ebook for free just because you're a member. And there's also a link there if you're like me and you like having a physical book sometimes. I like the combination.
If you really want lots of them, you could have hundreds. I mean, you can get hundreds. I want to point that out to the viewers.
Yeah, that's right. And if you have employees and you are no longer able to raise their wages, or you decided you're going to pay them off books and you need to give them some kind of side benefits, you might consider giving your employees this book so that they understand why you can't pay them anymore.
Oh, well, but the problem is that also might introduce cognitive dissonance when you tell them I'm giving this to you. They will recognize that I'm not giving it to them. I'm charging them for that is somewhere else. You got to be careful. Make them up.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I won't let them watch this show before I give them the book. They'll have to read the book to realize, and then I'll know which ones actually read the book.
Anyway, so you were looking at something there.
Yes, there's this way deep in the book when we get into the policy section. There's a related issue, the living wage myth here, and you talk about this study that people have been so excited about, the Newmark study by California economist David Newmark, saying that despite that, even though everybody knows raising minimum wage does increase some employment among low-skilled workers, it does also increase the wages of that kind of demographic. And this apparently has been taken up as a great rallying call for the wonderful success of minimum wage laws. Can you talk a bit about the Newmark study and what's wrong with this idea?
Okay, well, the issue is if I raise the wage of a certain subgroup, first of all, if there are fringe benefits involved that can be cut. When you push up the minimum wage, you cut other things. I don't provide you with uniforms. I don't provide you with transportation. I don't provide you things. So to that extent, you can raise their wages without making them better off. And in fact, you can make them worse off. Because when you're getting fringe benefits, it's not taxable. And if I'm forced to pay you dollar wages instead of fringe benefits, I am forcing you to take taxable income instead of non-taxable income. So
because the benefit to me, if I'm the employer, if I'm giving you a fringe benefit worth $1,000 or $1,000, it's the same to me. But to you, the employee, if there's a tax on the other side of that, you're only getting $750 of the wage benefit, but you would get the full $1,000 of the fringe benefit.
So by forcing them to take it in official dollars, you may make people worse off. Not only are you forcing them away from the compensation bundle they chose, right? You're also throwing tax in. It may be it's worth more to me to get on-the-job training, $1,000 instead of $1,000. It's not only does it raise my future income where I can't pay for it any other way, but it's non-taxable. So I get rid of the on-the-job training, which I actually preferred to the money, and it's taxable at the same time. So you have that issue going on. But the living wage argument is kind of interesting. Is the minimum wage story usually was at a much lower wage. Well, a lot of people used to talk about $15 as a living wage, and now they're talking about it as the minimum. So it's like those two literatures are kind of merging.
Okay.
You have a smallish increase in minimum wage. You can offset a lot of it with other changes. But when you double it, you can't do that effect. So you're going to see a larger effect there. So if you look at minimum wage studies that say raise wages 10%, that small size is going to lead to a much smaller response than if you double the wage. You're going to get a much larger response to that much higher wage than you would. So there's this problem of you extrapolate from a minimum wage study that says the effects are small, but they're small for small wage increases. They're big for big wage increases. So it's one of those counting and tricks that are used empirically to try and make the effects look different. But when you look at the living wage stuff, just like the minimum wage, who backs it? The unions. Why do unions back it? Again, you're raising the price of substitutes. If you raise it a lot, right? What if you're the union for people who work for government? And a lot of the early living wage laws were to raise the wages the government paid contractors. Well, those are union employees. Right? So if I pass living wages, the unions benefit directly by higher wages for all the people whose wages went up. They benefit indirectly by raising the price of substitutes for union labor, right? They make it easier to unionize because the non-union alternative is more expensive than it used to be. Yeah, they're behind all. And it's not, you can see as a problem, if you can explain something purely by somebody's self-interest, or they claim the same thing is caused by their altruistic nature. Which do you believe? See, we want to believe it's altruism. Nobody else believes it of us. But I mean, that's the point, is if you think and say, this can be explained solely with self-interest, the rest of it is just boilerplate to cover up what's really going on.
Bloviation and boilerplate.
Yeah, bourbon and bloviation, if it's not
Bourbon and bloviation. The alternate title for the show is Bourbon and Bloviation. We have a little wave of extra viewers coming on right now because another show is finishing. So I want to take a moment to reintroduce. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Liberty Me Live. I hope you enjoyed the Tatiana show. This is the first episode of Scotch and Scholars. I'm Mike Reed, your host. I am drinking scotch. My guest is Gary Galles. Gary Galles, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking Southern Comfort for old time's sake.
And you were telling me that Southern Comfort was your comfort when you were in grad school, is that right?
I mean, this is as an undergraduate, when my good friend and I would be studying late at night, this was what we used. He ended up at Harvard, and I ended up going to UCLA to graduate school. So
not bad. So tonight we're talking about minimum wage policies, and I want to jump right on to a question that came from the audience, from Tiraz in the audience. And Tiraz wants us to talk about the sense of a trade-off between wages and corporate profits. Really often you see, how shall I say, people of a socialistic bent explaining that a minimum wage increase of a certain amount, $1 or $7, is not a big deal because there's so much money already in the corporate profit that you can just kind of take some of that away and give it to the workers. And this, can you speak to that?
Workers' compensation is something like 70% of national income. The vast majority of everything goes to workers. Corporate profits are a little bit, if you took all the profits of corporations for the year, you would be nowhere close to the cost of that wage bill. People don't realize how small profits are relative to the other parts of the economy because, you know, people are innumerate. They don't know anything about math, and they keep track of no data. I mean, you know, you ever seen a person on the street looking through and say, what is the actual percentage that goes to profits in corporations? And how does that compare to the trillions of dollars that go to personal income? It's not very large. Actually, I could walk over there and probably grab and let you know, and I'll find that number out for you. But the magnitudes are very different. Right. And ultimately, if you taxed corporations, what you'd also see is the shift out of corporations that bear the tax into things like subchapter S corporations that don't face the same laws. You will see shifts into partnerships. You'll see shifts into, you know, proprietorships that aren't subject to corporate taxes. So it's not that. In fact, if you look at the share of total income that goes to compensation over long periods of time, it's very stable. There is a small change now, but then what does it really say? I want to steal from that person. Right? I want to make them do what they won't do. I have to make them a bad guy, otherwise I'm the bad guy. If I want to steal from Mike Reed, I know stealing's wrong. But if you're a bad guy and I can say you stole it first, just like Marx would say, you know, workers of the world unite, steal back what the capitalists stole from you. You have to demonize the people you plan to violate, abuse. It's just like war. Right? We have what we call Japanese nips, you know, all those insulting terms. Why? You have to dehumanize them. So the same thing. You have to dehumanize corporations, and they have a big advantage because they aren't actually people.
So, I mean, admittedly, I am the kind of wealthy guy who lives on profits made from the sweat of underpaid teenagers. But I want to go back to
they got paid more than they would have otherwise, or they wouldn't have agreed.
That's right. Those teenagers should be lucky they're working in my burger flipping shack.
No, they are lucky. It's their alternative. Sucks so bad that you're giving a better alternative, and people want to say, well, you should compare what their circumstances are to what is in the United States, a very rich country. Well, there's no way to get there. I mean, a lot of times the alternative to sweatshops is prostitution for young girls in a lot of ways. Well, you know, when you think prostitution, sweatshops better than it was, and go back to American history, what did most people watching this show's great grandparents do? They worked in sweatshops because it was a poor country. They made it so that we were rich today. So, yeah. And, you know, think of the cultures. You know, you think of this as the expatriate Chinese culture. They are willing to sacrifice a lot for that future generation. Well, they do it. We were poor, we worked hard, we didn't like it, but we gave our kids and grandkids possibilities. I have an Italian friend. I mean, literally, his father came over, he was a winemaker. He became a baker because that's what you do in a city in New York. He hated it, but worked 14 hours a day, and his kids all got great educations. They're all doing great. I think the United States could use a lot more of that. I don't see that I'm willing to sacrifice for future generations stuff like it was before.
No, indeed. And in fact, I've decided that I'm going to work as little as I can and still eat for myself. And I'm not really worried about my kids. I figure they'll just work to support me when they hit like 13, 14. So that's why I'm really concerned about the minimum wage. If it goes up too high, then my kids won't be able to find a job when they're 14 and start paying for me.
That's true. And you know, it's a lot worse than that, because minimum wage jobs are designed to be temporary jobs. The vast majority of people spend no more than 6 months at a minimum wage job, because as I tell my students, what you're doing is you come in with no measurable skills. You show up and you say, I can show up on time, I can take directions, I can work as a team, and I can smile at people I think are jerks. That's the customer service part. Once you demonstrate those skills, what happens? You move on to where you do more skills, right, for a higher wage. Well, if you're trying to raise a family of 6 on a minimum wage, I mean, you already made your mistake, right? It's never designed to do that stuff. It was designed, and think of it. Have you ever worked at a fast food restaurant, Alas?
Oh yeah, I did. We have a donut shop in Canada called Tim Hortons. Do you have this?
My daughter-in-law has tried to survive as a vegetarian on trips in Canada by eating grilled cheese sandwiches at Tim Hortons, because you don't have a lot of vegetarian stuff there. But on a lot of those, you know, it used to be you had to hit the numbers and hit add and do that stuff. Now it's just pictures, right? You don't even have to be able to read to do that. So that is that you're trying to say, I have these very basic skills, so it's worth taking a shot to go on. If you don't get the first job, you never demonstrate those skills. There is a permanent effect that you are poor for the rest of your life, just like they do these studies. People who came out after the 2008 recession, they are going to have the rest of their life, they're going to make less than cohorts before them because they didn't move up the ladder that quick, so they delay every step in the process. So, I mean, it's worse, and that's something you don't see in the measures. The people that are harmed who lose their jobs, they don't just lose income this year. They lose income next year, next year, next year, next year. And that's part of the cost that is hidden when they say, well, look at how much they lose today. In fact, I had a labor professor as an undergraduate. They talked about a study in the mid-'60s where they raised the minimum wage 3 years in a row. And they did what's called a longitudinal study. You track.
Okay, so they followed the same people.
Well, you're following the group from 65 and the group from 66 and the group. Well, it turns out that within 18 months, the group with the lowest minimum wage had the highest average earnings, because they demonstrated it and they moved on. With higher minimum wages, they didn't get that on the job training. They didn't demonstrate as quick, and their future earnings would appreciate. So you can make a strong argument that the people who win from a higher minimum wage lose.
Wow.
If you keep your job today, you make more money today, but you get less on the job training, and so you're going to make less next year, next year, next year, next year. And there's actually evidence that suggests that's the case. Because if a higher minimum wage really made a job better, what should happen to labor force participation? People should be more willing to work if the deal was better. When they raise the minimum wage, labor force participation goes down, not up. Wow. The other things that are changed are worse than what you got in the higher minimum wage. right? The same thing for quits. If your jobs got better, people would be less likely to quit. But when you raise the minimum wage, quit rates go up. Something's going on there that isn't on the surface obvious. And that's part of the problem of this is the empirical stuff with the minimum wage is very tricky because there's a lot of future effects you can't measure easily, right? So if you just ignore them, you could easily get the wrong number. There's all this non-wage compensation that isn't counted appropriately. So you don't know that stuff. I mean, it's really tricky. Or even if looking at unemployment rates, you think higher minimum wage should lower the unemployment or should raise the unemployment rate. And it does a little, but here's the problem. What happens if Mike Reed loses his job when I raise the minimum wage? Do you become unemployed? You might if you look for work. What if you decide that wage is so high, I'm never going to find a job, so why look? You disappear from the data. You're not unemployed because you disappear from the labor force.
Or if I go become a student, I go decide I'm going to take an accounting degree.
Sure. Well, accounting's probably too hard. If you were pushed out from that, you probably don't want to work hard enough in accounting. My dad was an accounting professor. I have that on good authority.
yeah, keeping track of that kind of thing. Okay, so hang on. Speaking of the accounting thing, I want to circle back to some of the corporate thing. I want to forget about the corporate profits versus minimum wage. I want to summarize what I think you're saying and then have a follow-up from the audience. Okay, so what I think you're saying is that there's actually two dimensions to the corporate profits versus worker wages trade-off. One is that in terms of the overall US economy, and probably world economy too, corporate profits is actually quite a small amount of GDP as compared to wages total. And the second thing is that if you raise the wages artificially through a minimum wage legislation or a living wage legislation, then it's not just that you're taking from those corporate profits, it's that the investors will move their investments to other things, things where they don't officially have employees, other countries, industries where there are fewer employees and more robots.
Well, think about the high-tech industry. None of those people are unionized because it is complicated and changeable and you got to stay on top of things and it's fluid. You can't fit that easily into that scenario. And they're high skilled. So none of them are minimum wage. None of them are subject to unionization. Why are they so successful compared to other industries? Partly it's they're less regulated than others. They're less subject to unionization. Those people pay too much. So yeah, and then why do you think those people want to feel good about themselves? You've got $3 billion in Google options that you're going to get and you're 22 years old. You want to think you're a good guy. So you think, oh, I'm going to be in favor of a higher minimum wage and a living wage for all those other people?
Right. The people I went to university with who took a theater degree instead of a computer science degree.
Whether it helps them or not, you feel good about yourself.
Right.
There's a literature on demonstrative or expressive voting.
Expressive voting.
Yeah, so the idea is that what happens if I want to feel good about me? And I'm thinking of donating. If I gave you $100, I'd feel a certain amount of well-being from doing that. Well, what would happen if I voted for giving people larger amounts of money, right? I feel better about myself, but—
And you didn't have to pay the $100.
Yeah, you don't have to pay it because what happens, your vote won't matter. So you vote for things to make you feel good without actually committing to doing that.
My wife and I have an ongoing conversation about voting. For a while, there hasn't been anybody worth voting for in our area, and so I have declined to vote. And she sometimes votes the NDP because they promise subsidies to the daycare industry where she works. And I recently decided that since the best use of voting is to make yourself feel good, I could vote for the NDP just to make my wife happy.
Yes, but
that might be the best use of my vote.
How will she know, since voting is private, that you really did it? But people have done that in the United States where they've taken and it's been litigated. They take a picture of their ballot with their cell phone to show somebody. Well, if ballots are supposed to be private, there's some issues there. I like the Russian approach from way back when. You can vote. There's the Soviet candidate and whoever else might be there. Usually there's nobody. Well, what would happen if you put felt in the bottom of one of the boxes, which are metal, for the communist candidate? The vote goes in, it hits felt, you don't hear it. What if you have a tin lining in the other one? What happens when the ballot hits the tin lining? You hear
Ding.
it. So you technically have private voting, but they can still drag you off because they know which way you actually vote.
Well, hopefully my wife's not lining the Libertarian Party. I don't know if the Libertarian Party's, they're trying to get a candidate in my area. I know because they called me and tried to get me to be the candidate.
I have been approached myself in that sense. And I said, what's the matter? Don't you like me?
Why would you do that to me?
Mises, I think, was once asked, what would happen if they made you king or president, whatever. He says, I'd abdicate. That's what I would do too. But, Leonard Read, in the first book that I had, the Apostle of Peace, through Laissez-Faire Books, there is a lengthy section there about the argument about voting. And the question of and the arguments about why you must vote are all bogus. There is no good argument for why you must vote. So they can check that article, or just search my name and must vote. You'll find an article on mine.
So this is a bit of a sidetrack, but now I'm really interested. Sometimes there's a very acrimonious inter-libertarian conversation about voting, not just I don't think there's any libertarian, well, there's the occasional Walter Block thing when one of the polls runs, the Walter Block thinks you have to vote. But leaving Walter aside, there are some people who think it's kind of permissible and in some ways maybe useful to vote. And there's people that think it's almost, it's scurrilous, almost sinful for a libertarian to vote. Do you have a position on that spectrum?
Look at the difference between Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation.
Okay.
People at Cato libertarians don't want to reform government. The only reform is to get it the hell out of there. Okay, others want the government to be less abusive. They realize it's abusive. Getting rid of it doesn't seem practical. So you have one group that wants to reform government and another that wants to eliminate it. Well, the eliminate government people are the don't vote because you'll only encourage them people. Want you to respond and get a reformed government are the ones that think you should vote. Now, of course, that all comes down to what are the odds that your vote will matter.
Right.
And that's, the odds are zero. Right? So why would you be well informed about something? The example I use for my students is when you're spending your own money, say for health insurance, right? Your choice dictates the insurance policy you get and what it costs. So your choice changes the outcome. When you're voting in a Canadian election or an American election, what is the likelihood your vote will change the outcome?
Yeah,
it's zero.
Well,
there is no benefit. Every minute you spend voting better is a minute you spend making worse choices in your own life.
Yeah, but theoretically speaking, the smaller the constituency, it could approach a size where you have like a 1% chance of influencing the election. Well,
1% is not big enough. Your vote has to do it. Because when you change your vote, it doesn't change anybody else's. Your vote has to change the outcome. I remember seeing some argument. There was some election that was decided by 92 votes. This proves your votes matter. That's the editorial. No, it doesn't. It proves it doesn't matter. Even in the closest election they can find, your one vote doesn't do anything when there's a 92 vote difference. So proved their point, but it actually proved they were wrong.
Okay, so I think what I'm getting out of this is that you don't regard it as sort of immoral for a libertarian to vote, but merely futile.
Well, yes, you're not. You can't win unless you promise people stuff. Libertarians are never going to win elective office or heaven because they won't promise people stuff, right? They won't lie. That's why I like talking to libertarians. We may disagree on all sorts of things. But you know what? Libertarians as a group tell you the truth because they aren't willing to shade that truth to buy your approval. Right? That's why they think we're obnoxious too. We were going to say, this is what we believe, and you know what? I'm not really going to get bought off here on this idea. I guess I should take pride in how poor I am then, because you know what? Why don't I have somebody to pay me more money to write stuff? Because I write stuff. I don't back stealing for this group or that group and so forth. I run when someone says called bipartisan, because bipartisan never includes me, right? want to invade part of your life, and the Republicans want to invade the other part. And when they get together, they want to invade both parts. I am not on that spectrum. I'm perpendicular. I'm orthogonal in those dimensions to the population.
I'm recalling today, Steve Horowitz has a new video out with the Mercatus Institute about his work on the role of Walmart in helping people survive the Katrina disaster. That is, Walmart is really great at supply management. They know that everybody wants strawberry Pop-Tarts. Apparently, after disaster, strawberry Pop-Tarts are like your number one
had
food
something
item.
I think there he'd mentioned. I think I saw Don Boudreaux's name on something that was talking about how quick it was, and compared to FEMA, they bulk up in advance, they do this stuff. Yeah, they're much better at it.
Yeah, but Steve was lamenting that Walmart's never given him a check. I mean, he's so often accused of being a shill for Walmart or a lobbyist for them, but they've never sent him any money. I mean, I think Walmart owes him a lot of money. They probably owe you too.
Yes, well, I have defended Walmart in many venues, but it's about, I'm not really that into an ad hominem argument, just attack people. I'm interested, is the argument valid? And almost all of those are twisting the words, they're twisting the analysis, they're twisting the data. They're paying people to lie. And I don't like lying to control things. So I've defended it, but I've also attacked them. They started putting their efforts behind raising minimum wages.
Right.
You know why? Because they pay more than the minimum wage in most states.
Right, and it hurts their competitors.
Minimum wage, they force their rivals in those states to pay more. So I called them on the carpet for that one too. But yeah, I mean, there's McKinsey and Company did this big study years ago. I think the typical poor person like $1,800 better off from the existence of Walmart, because Walmart has lower costs. Their distribution network revolutionized, wholesale and distribution. Others had to match. I mean, there's actually a measurable effect on people's well-being benefiting by Walmart. There is no such evidence from government that I've seen.
Okay, now I want to go back to something that's come up partly from, we were talking about faulty premises, faulty policies, and the section on the living wage. And I guess I'm a bit baffled on the difference between a living wage proposal and a minimum wage proposal. And maybe we can clarify it if we start with this anecdote from the audience. So Brian Tomlinson, he's a tiny house builder. He's a Liberty Me member. And I'm going to read his anecdote, and maybe that will, you'll be able to pick it apart. He builds tiny houses. Yeah. Yes, he is, as far as I know, a regular sized man. I haven't asked whether he is himself tiny, but he builds tiny houses. I'm not sure if being tiny is an advantage in that situation or not. So Brian says the living wage came in over 10 years ago in Austin, Texas, as a propaganda, but amusingly enough, it was well below the actual minimum wage, not the government mandated minimum wage, but the actual wage employers had to pay to hire entry-level people in Austin.
In construction, seasoned construction people, that's more dangerous. More workman's comp issues. It's harder work. I wouldn't want to work on roofing something in Austin, Texas in August. No. There are a lot of those things. But sure, you raise the minimum wage. It's related to how to call it. Government as a front runner. Say that you're in government and you see that the incredible creativity of Mike Reed is going to make people earn more in the near future. Well, let's not let you get credit for it. I'm going to pass a law now that will mandate higher future wages. Then when you nose to the grindstone figure this out, government gets credit. I mean, why do you think they want to legislate fuel economy standards out to 2025? They want to impose 70-year rules on things today. They see that productivity of the capitalist system is there. So I can just take your productivity, turn it to my uses, claim credit, and then blame you for everything wrong. That's a 50 game.
So it's kind of like, it reminds me of this statement from Gandhi. Gandhi says, there go my people. I'm their leader. I guess I should get in front of them.
Well, there is that too. Yes, that's why it's so much fun to watch Trump entertain people in politics. He'll say something, and do you think, well, do you respond to that one? So it's interesting.
So can we talk for a moment about the relationship between minimum wage legislation and actual wages in the marketplace, and the influx of black market illegal immigrant labor in the United States?
Well, you're not going to have very good data about immigrant black market data in that sort of situation. So I'm not sure you do it. I know that the influx has been quite weak. You have a recession, people are coming across the border for jobs. Well, when there are jobs, we have had far less people. In fact, that's one of the problems of reinforcing the border. Most people come here for jobs. When their job is done, they usually go back. They go back home.
So if you reinforce the border, you have all these unemployed guys who are stuck?
Yeah. So what happens is they won't go home. They will stay here because they can't get back in. So the wall, remember, is a wall to exit as well, since you can't get back. Right? Like in economics, a barrier to entry is a barrier to exit. They have parallel effects. And so, all these simplistic solutions, there is never just one incentive story that can be changed. The example I use in class, as I say, is about a week. Okay, about a week of economics. Now, I'm going to give you $1 billion, and I want you to spend it in a way that will reduce smoking. Right? It's the thought experiment.
Great.
So what have you learned so far? Incentives matter. Okay, so why don't you just pay people not to smoke? People who smoke, I'll pay 10 grand to stop. Right? Sounds good so far, right? How could that increase smoking?
But new people want to start smoking, so that you'll give them money.
They're going to get paid 10 grand to stop, and it'll turn out to be harder to stop than they think sometimes. Right? So you can't change just one incentive story. I change your incentives, that changes your behavior, which changes the incentives people impinge on you, and so on. I can't give money to somebody without taking money from somebody. Right? You can't just look in one place. And basically, that's it, guy. Anytime someone's only looking at one effect, they are misrepresenting economics. Think about this. If you raise the minimum wage, you will now get $1 more an hour than you got before. Right? Which makes you better off, and then you're going to spend it, multiply effects, bullshit, and this stuff. Now, what did they leave out? If I had to pay you $1 more an hour, I got the exact same services, but I had to give up $1 more resources. It's just a transfer from me to you. There is no net gain there, right? But they leave out the fact that that dollar had to come from somebody else who got nothing for it, right? So they just, that's they're looking at one side and not another in various dimensions. Well, what was it in economics in one lesson, right? What were the two lessons in the one lesson? Right? Good economics, you look at the long run as well as the short run, because when you change the short run incentives, their behavior is going to change, and that's going to change the long run behavior. And looking at one group and not another, they're both the same error, right? You're intentionally ignoring some effects because you want to make something look good, whether it is good or not. Just call me Mr. Sunshine,
Well, it's a funny thing. Because in a sense, you are Mr. Sunshine, because you're saying it's actually, the market system actually works pretty well already. So that's the sunny part of the story. It's just if you want to force some stuff with levers and you want to vote to feel good about it, that's where the gloom and doom comes in.
And the Rube Goldberg apparatus. Did you ever play Mousetrap as a kid? The game Mousetrap?
Yeah, you mean with it's got like all kinds of elaborate pieces where the marble rolls in another piece.
And Goldberg drawing about incredibly complicated ways to do simple things. Well, if you want to buy something, you go buy it. Pretty simple. You choose, they choose, multiple deal. When you do it with government, you have this convoluted, you have to have checks and balances, which don't actually check or balance anything. You got to have this, and you got to have an oversight board. Well, why do you need an oversight over the government? Because they don't watch themselves. Well, you are your own oversight. You spend your dollar, you watch you. I trust you with that, right? That's always the irony when the government says, you guys aren't watching these evil corporations or somebody else. We will step in and watch for you, right? We'll protect you. Well, here's the problem. How carefully do you watch the government?
Not very carefully.
And they know you're not going to watch. What's the likelihood when you tell them, look, we're not going to watch you, that they're actually going to do a better job than you will with your own money? I think that's an irony I have to show my students, that whenever the government says, trust us, we'll watch on your behalf, all you have to ask is, well, how carefully are they watched? And it's like, think about it. You don't watch the politicians. Politicians know that. That changes their incentives. So they don't watch the bureaucrats because you're not watching them watch the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats know it. Who's watching the bureaucrats? Nobody. Mine spill in Colorado, and you'll have a good idea of how carefully they watch the bureaucrats. Wasn't that the Gold King mine spill?
The new that turned the river kind of goldenrod color.
You know, it depends on the lighting. Could be yellow, could be orange. Not
I hear there's a massive suit going forth. Is it a Navajo group that's offering a massive suit?
I'm sure there's lots of them. But you know, if this was a private corporation, they would be going after them, asking for BP-sized settlements. Well, it's right. Yeah, they're going to basically use this to prove that they need a water treatment plant there that they're going to be paid to build. Not right. I think they should make EPA employees swim in the water. That's an appropriate incentive.
Amazing. Gary, I want to get back to one thing we talked about. Oh, I wanted to get something from the audience before we wrap up. Thinking about immigration, wages, and also another thing that's kind of the opposite or the other side of immigration, which is the idea of remittances, where people come here, they're working at a higher wage than they could in their home country, and then what they're actually doing is they're sending a ton of money back. I'm in Winnipeg, and the remittances all go to the Philippines here, but I understand the United States, India is a big source of
Mexico, big destination. South and Central American countries, but Mexico is the biggest. Well, when you think about it this way, if you're worried about how many foreigners come here, if I can't send you remittances back to Mexico and I want to be here, aren't some of those people going to move to the United States, the rest of the family? Right? It's cheaper for the dependents to live in Mexico. Right? Because so if I can send them remittances, I can support a family in Mexico much better not being in Mexico. But if I couldn't send them the remittances, right? Because they live in, what's the Mexican cost of living compared to the American cost of living?
Right.
So if I can't send you remittances, people are only thinking, well, wait, then they won't come across the border. Maybe some of them, but some of them are going to bring their whole family with them because that's the only way they can support them. They work here and they live here illegally. It's you know, when people look at immigration, I think part of the issue is, I have a colleague who, you know, immigration is one of his big things. He basically says the net effect of immigration is very small. But people focus on, you come in and take my job. You know what else happens?
Right.
You come in and spend a lot of that money here, which increases the demand for other things, and that creates jobs elsewhere. Right? They only focus on
doing my job. While you're doing my job, I can be doing some other dang job.
Yeah. So, you know, I think a lot of it is, this is the problem with economics. Economics is complicated at the basic logical level. It takes training and practice to see, there's an incentive story that's not been noticed here. I mean, that's what I have to tell all my policy students. If you have a prediction that makes sense in your head and it's wrong, you don't say, what's wrong with those damn people? What you say is, what incentive story did I miss? Right? It's always telling you that there's an incentive story out there that you did not see. So when you see evidence that's inconsistent with an incentive story, that's the fun part. That's the puzzle. That's what's interesting. I mean, we're supposed to be talking mainly about minimum wage stuff, but one of the things I want to mention is I'm bored with the minimum wage. I started thinking about public policy 29 years ago. I've probably written a couple dozen or more articles about various aspects of the minimum wage and, you know, other controls and stuff. You know, it's not an intellectual puzzle to me anymore. And yet, this is how they wear down libertarians. I'm bored with it. I don't want to write anything more. Well, they keep coming out with new crap with new databases and new empirical cheats and all this other stuff. The cost of keeping up with all that is very high, and I'm not interested anymore. So I think Walter Williams probably written 100 or more.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And the reason is, it goes back to his studies about the white South African labor unions. Who do you think sponsored the higher wage legislation in South Africa? It was the white unions, saying it was the blacks. Well, if people didn't like blacks, they didn't have as much training. Making them pay the same wage as whites simply means the jobs went to whites. So it's dressed up as good for others, right? But it's really to benefit us at their expense. So, I mean, there's such a natural connection to unions in the United States and minimum wages as there is there, that I think he goes to. So, I mean, I'm sure he writes more about it than he wants. I mean, I think a lot of libertarians got this figured out. We sort of know what's really going on, but there's this unending wash of bullshit, and the people who are for it. You can't disprove something enough that it works. There was this famous study by Card and Kruger that supposedly showed the minimum wage didn't cost jobs. It turns out that entire thing was based on phone surveys with whoever answered the phone at those restaurants, right? But someone went back and actually looked at hours work data later. They were wrong. It did exactly what we would have thought. But to this date, probably 20 years later, people still cite Card and Kruger as proving that minimum wages don't cost jobs. Right? And it only takes a couple, and they simply ignore the rest of the stuff.
Well, I'm sorry we had to drag you through minimum wages again, and the chances are Gary will be back at this next year. I'm going to call him up. I'm going to say, Gary, we want to do another show about minimum wages.
No, tell you what, I'll do one on rent control, which is parallel in a lot of ways.
Okay, we'll do rent control next time. I'm worried if I call you up about minimum wage again, I'm just going to hear glass smashing as you leap out the window.
Well, you know what would be interesting? If there's a way the question is phrased that leads to a new issue. Oh, I see something I didn't see before, then it's okay. But it's the fun part about economics is that recognition, that now makes sense. There's a lot of things about economics that are obvious once you think of them.
Once you
think of them first, and that's the part I like. That's why I'm kind of ADD. Something interests me because I don't understand why that makes sense. I think I attribute that to Armin Alshin, who is the person I went to UCLA to study under, because sometimes he would go with other faculty, even grad students, to lunch. And
okay.
He was like a dog with a bone. There was something going on, and he didn't understand it. And he would throw out hypothesis after hypothesis after hypothesis. And people at the thing would say, Ari, that's crazy. But basically, he wouldn't stop until it made sense. That's why he was such a productive and creative economist, is because he was doing that part. What can make sense of what I see? Or, what empirical stuff? I mean, I have a lot of respect for some people who are really good at empirical stuff, but the skill is not knowing the empirical stuff. It's saying, this is a test. Walter Wessel says, don't look at the unemployment rate, look at the quit rate and the labor force participation rate, because that measures it better. Right? A lot of conservatives and libertarians make a strong case weaker by citing the wrong data. You're undermining your own case because you don't even know what it is that you should be arguing about. That's sad.
Wow. Gary, I've got to start wrapping it up, but I want to take a minute, my usual wrap-up system. I want to first tell people how to get more Gary Galleys. I want to second tell people what else is coming up this week on Liberty.me Live. Things are getting really packed as we're ramping up for the fall season again. And then I'm going to turn it back to you for the final word, which might be about how quickly I'll be replaced by a robot. I have to keep my questions very engaging and creative, or very soon a robot. But that is an interesting statement, Gary. Can you tell me more about page 249?
Well, see, you already got a job. You always know. Can you do the robot dance too? See, that you'll have it made.
Okay, so first of all, more Gary Galleys. One of the best ways to get more Gary Galleys is to check out his frequent articles over on Mises.org at the Mises Wire. Here is the link for that. And there are 2 books you really ought to check out, especially because you're a Liberty.me member, and so you get the ebook version free. This is Lines of Liberty. This is the new book by Gary Galleys, and it is also, so far as I know, the biggest and best book of libertarian quotations in existence. Our guess is, what is that? Something like 5,000 quotations is our guess for the total.
I don't even remember anymore. I think we talked about this one time, and I've given up, but it is 69 people if I recall, that are in that thing. Some of them are very long, and it's a little over 100,000 words. So, however many quotes is 108,000 words.
It's really amazing and very well selected too. Like he just clips the pithiest things. So if you're looking for like a new email status or something you want to post on Facebook today, that is the book to go to, Lines of Liberty. And the next one I want to tell you guys about is the one that inspired our talk today, Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies. I am in fact holding the print version of Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies right now. I got it in the mail this afternoon, actually. I was delighted. I was kind of biting my nails whether I was going to get it before the show tonight. Okay, so that's where to get more great Gary Galleys. I also want to tell you guys about neat things that are coming up later this week on Liberty.me Live. The first of them is an Eye on the Empire episode with Jeffrey Tucker and Scott Horton. Eye on the Empire usually focuses on foreign policy, but of course, as you may know, Jeffrey Tucker was recently arrested and spent the day in jail over a traffic infraction, and he's been writing a lot about that, and I suspect he and Scott are going to talk a lot about that experience too, and how it changes Jeffrey's perception of our burgeoning police state. We also have Unbiased. Sorry, I should say that show comes on at 8 o'clock Eastern on Tuesday night. So that's tomorrow night, about 22 hours from now. The next one I want to tell you about is Unbiased America, which is probably our most policy-centered show. So if you're kind of a Gary Galleys-y, policy-oriented guy, you're going to like Unbiased America. And that comes on at 8 o'clock on Wednesday night. And their guest is Julia Aaron, who is a Miss Minnesota 2009 and also the chief Capitol reporter for Alpha News. And finally, I really want to make sure to mention a third show coming up, of course, which is the Sheldon Richman, Walter Block, long-awaited discussion on left libertarianism. So Sheldon is a long-standing left libertarian. He's described himself that way for a long time. Walter Block has recently gone on a tear, explaining that left libertarians are the worst thing since, well, unsliced bread. And we decided we would bring them together and see what happens. So we've got Sheldon and Walter, and they're being moderated by Lucy Steigerwald, whose main job is to make sure the whole thing stays sane and we can all follow what the heck is going on. So that's going to be a fun show, and that is on
wrestling suits.
Yeah, wrestling suits, maybe luchador masks. So that is on 9 o'clock Eastern on Friday night of this week. So those are the three more great shows I want to tell you guys about for this week. So now I'm all done my shameless promotion of thingsliberty.me. Now I'll turn it back over to Gary for the final word.
Okay, well, I have a shameless promotion of my own. If you want to find stuff I'm writing, you should also start looking at Independent Institute, because I am starting an association with them. I will be writing, I don't know how frequently, but a couple things for their blogs or their commentary stuff. So
that's great. That's independent.org. I'll just pop that URL in the chat for our viewers too.
And you should call them and tell them to pay me more money.
Yes, I will. I will. In fact, I should demand that they raise the wage for even their entry-level scholars.
Yes.
Although I suppose well, you know, if we demand that they raise the wage for entry-level scholars, that really protects your job because you're a little bit above an entry-level scholar at this stage, Gary.
Well, but I'm the last one in, you know, so those guys lose. It's the really established scholars that do okay.
Okay, like Robert Higgs if he wasn't moving on. Okay, great. So Gary, this has been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Tiraz, Brian, everybody else in the comments. It's been great to talk to you. Ken, good to see you too. I hope everybody's going to have a lovely evening. I'll see you soon on Liberty.me Live. Good night.
Thank you, Mike. States where if you pay somebody more than a certain amount, and it's far less than I pay my gardener, you're supposed to set aside, you know, Social Security for them and do all that too. So one of the things people don't realize, the minimum wage is not the minimum wage. In America, right, you have to pay the minimum wage, plus you have to pay 7.65% of that, because the employer has to pay half of their Social Security and Medicare taxes, plus the employer has to pay unemployment insurance. And what's a really big one, an employer may have to pay workman's comp payments that may be $4.50 an hour. In some places where you're likely to be injured or fake injuries, then you have to pay that. So if they're going to raise the minimum wage and they're going to raise all those other parts of compensation, I think the minimum wage is going to be over 20 bucks an hour.
Wow. You mean even at present? I mean, the federal minimum wage is, what is it, $7.25 right now?
Well, workman's comp depends on the state.
I see.
State by state. So yes, there are some states that, including workman's comp for dangerous occupations, the minimum wage could well be over $20 an hour in some places already.
Wow. I wonder if fast food counts, like the danger of putting your hand in the deep fryer.
I think in the fast food thing, I think it's more likely that someone's going to be in a dead-end job and is going to find a way to create an injury in the underground economy. So, so the idea is that, and that's why you don't see more data on it. Well, the workers' comp part varies by state and industry. Like that with it's like with union wages. Union wages have a predictable effect on the non-union sector. So if you raise the minimum wage, there are fewer jobs available in the legitimate sector. Some of those people will simply shift over into the other sector, and it tends to lower their wages because they can't get jobs elsewhere. But if fine, upstanding, and law-abiding citizens such as yourself insist on being above board, then for you, the law may be binding. But if you're in America, you have to make them wear a helmet while they ride around. So you have to, mowing the lawn too.
Helmet, eye protection. I want to just take. Go ahead.
There was a story several years ago in the middle of the recession where this trucking company could not hire any truckers if he paid them above board. He could hire thousands of drivers if he paid them under the table in cash, but he couldn't hire anybody at the wages he would pay otherwise, because they could work under the table, not pay Social Security, still be eligible for welfare, still be eligible for food stamps. So the scam economy.
Yeah, and it seems, and along with that, if you're paying people above board, then you have to deduct payroll taxes on your side and on their side.
Well, there's a nanny tax regulation in the United States.
This is a collection, not just of the policies that are emanating from all corridors of power in the United States today and what's wrong with them, but also the ideas underlying those policies. So most of the book is really a sort of an ideas book, ideas applied to policies. And as he says on the back, when there are false premises, it's very hard to get correct policies in the end.
Well, it may be impossible or almost impossible.
Yeah, we don't seem to have a great track record lately of good policies anyway.
Well, the old saying about a broken clock being right twice a day. So if somebody actually asked me to comment on Donald Trump maybe a week ago, something I said, well, he's right once in a while, because when his self-interest lines up with the general welfare, then he's right. The rest of the time, there's no relationship between those two.
No, indeed. So tonight, the policy we really want to narrow in on is the idea of a minimum wage. I've been enjoying greatly. I don't know if everybody else has seen it, but there's lots of posts going on. You see them on Facebook or on Liberty Me about robots for a $15 minimum wage. And so I'm not yet replaced by a robot, but if they keep raising the minimum wage, someday I may be. Maybe even Gary too.
Yes, I'm not sure they make robots that think as oddly as I do. That would be extra. But they are doing it. One of the fast food chains announced that they were going to replace people with little computer screens at the table, so you will replace waiters. And earlier times, for instance, the history of those restaurants where you go down the long lines of tables and serve yourself, those were caused by an increase in the minimum wage. Because when you serve yourself, you don't need all the servers, you don't have all the waiters, and when you raise the price of waiters, you have more banquet-style foods. They help to eliminate full serve at the gas stations in America, because the cost of hiring minimally skilled kids went up relative to doing it yourself. So, there are all sorts of historical episodes. This has happened before. It's not like it's a surprise.
Right. So what does this do in terms of the informal sector? Like, I remember when I was a kid, how I got money, I just mowed people's lawns, and I don't think there was ever any tax collection relevant to that. I don't think any government official knew that I was mowing people's lawns. And my advertising was just, I was riding around town on my bicycle pulling a lawnmower behind me.
Yeah.
And but nowadays I feel like I can't, the wages to hire children to mow my lawn have gone up. I don't understand. I would think that they'd be being driven out of the formal economy by rising minimum wages, and they'd be flocking to the informal economy to mow my lawn for me.
Well, they see that effect both in the informal economy, and you see an effect like.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Liberty Me Live. We are here for the very first evening of Scotch and Scholars. I'm Mike Reed, your host, and our guest tonight is Professor Gary Galles. Gary, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you again. Cheers.
Cheers, indeed. I am drinking a fresh new bottle of Red Label Scotch whiskey, as is appropriate to the show title.
I'm afraid mine isn't Scotch, but it's what I have.
Is it really the bourbon?
No, it's not. It's Southern Comfort, because that was something that a friend of mine who I was close to in college, and we were both econ majors, that got us into it. It was Southern Comfort was the drink that we bonded over. So I thought it was appropriate.
Like when you were getting ready for exams and so on, it was Southern Comfort time?
Actually, yeah. In the evening, we would do that stuff. We had the experience where there was one famous question from George Stigler that we were studying, because we were in the graduate, as undergraduates. We couldn't figure it out. A couple of drinks later, in the morning at breakfast, I did it on a napkin, and I could figure it out. So yes, it did help.
So for those of you who don't know, Gary is a professor at Pepperdine University. He is also the author of Lines of Liberty, a new ebook from Liberty Me, and also the book that'll be starring in today's show, Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies, another Liberty Me book.